What if you discovered that your overwhelming love for your adult child is actually pushing them away? You pour your heart into every interaction, celebrate their achievements as your own, and offer guidance from decades of hard-won wisdom. Yet, somehow the distance between you grows wider with each passing year. Your calls go unanswered, your advice falls on deaf ears, and family gatherings feel strained rather than joyful. The painful truth is that your child feels suffocated by the very love you thought would bring you closer. Your genuine care has transformed into something they experience as control, judgment, and emotional manipulation. Here's a statistic that will shock you. 98% of mothers unknowingly sabotage their relationships with adult children through 8 specific mistakes that appear loving but create devastating distance. These aren't obvious errors like cruelty or neglect, but subtle patterns woven into daily interactions with the best of intentions. You check their social media to stay connected, but they feel surveilled. You offer solutions to help them succeed, but they feel incompetent. You share their good news with family because you're proud, but they feel like their privacy has been violated. You remind them of your sacrifices because you want appreciation, but they feel burdened by guilt. These loving gestures backfire because the transition from parenting children to relating with adults requires completely different skills. The heartbreaking reality is that most mothers receive no training for this crucial transformation in their most important relationship. Society teaches us how to raise children, but offers no guidance for releasing them into independent adulthood while maintaining meaningful connection. You're expected to intuitively navigate this complex transition, shifting from authority figure to supportive peer overnight. The protective instincts that served you well for 18 years suddenly become relationship poison. Your natural desire to guide, protect, and stay involved clashes with their developmental need for autonomy, respect, and emotional independence. This collision creates a painful dynamic where love feels like control and care feels like criticism. The cost of these unconscious patterns extends far beyond missed phone calls or awkward holiday dinners. You're losing the relationship you've invested your entire adult life building, watching your child drift away despite your desperate efforts to stay close. Your sense of purpose as a mother feels threatened when your guidance is rejected, and your involvement is unwelcome. The loneliness is profound as you witness your child sharing their joys and struggles with friends while keeping you at arm's length. Meanwhile, your adult child struggles with guilt over disappointing you, resentment over feeling controlled, and confusion about how to love you while maintaining their independence. Both of you suffer in this dynamic, trapped by patterns neither fully understands. But here's the hopeful truth. These 8 relationship-destroying mistakes can be completely transformed once you recognize them and learn healthier alternatives. When you understand exactly what's happening beneath the surface of your interactions, you gain the power to rebuild connection on a foundation of mutual respect rather than parental authority. Instead of being needed out of obligation, you'll be chosen out of genuine affection. Your adult child will seek your wisdom because they trust your ability to listen without judgment, and they'll share their life because they feel truly seen and accepted. The transformation isn't just about improving your relationship with them. It's about discovering a new identity as a mother that brings deeper fulfillment than you ever imagined possible. To help you see this transformation clearly, I want to tell you a story about Sarah, a 51-year-old marketing manager living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Her son Jake, 27, and working as a graphic designer, rarely called and seemed to barely tolerate their interactions. Sarah couldn't understand why her devoted mothering felt like such a burden to him, especially when she'd sacrificed so much to give him every opportunity. She genuinely believed her involvement showed love, her advice demonstrated care, and her emotional investment proved her dedication. But over one revealing weekend, Sarah would discover exactly how her well-intentioned actions were systematically destroying the relationship she treasured most. The story begins on a Friday evening, as Sarah bustled through her comfortable suburban home, straightening throw pillows that were already perfectly arranged. Jake was coming for the weekend with important news to share, and she'd spent the entire week preparing for his visit. She'd bought his favorite snacks, rearranged the guest room furniture to accommodate his height, and even researched his recent projects online to have intelligent conversation topics ready. Her kitchen counters overflowed with ingredients for the elaborate meal she'd planned, each dish designed to recreate happy memories from his childhood. Sarah's excitement was genuine, but beneath it lay an anxious need to prove her indispensability through perfect hospitality and anticipation of his every need. When Jake's car pulled into the driveway that evening, Sarah positioned herself at the front window, watching as he emerged with a young woman she'd only seen in social media photos. Rachel was smaller than Sarah had imagined, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and an easy smile that immediately put Sarah on guard. As they approached the front door, Sarah could see Jake's shoulders tense in a way that had become familiar over the years, a physical bracing for whatever emotional intensity awaited him inside. Rachel noticed his change in demeanor and squeezed his hand reassuringly, unaware that this simple gesture would soon become the catalyst for a weekend that would change everything. Sarah opened the door before they could knock, her welcoming smile masking the subtle evaluation already beginning in her mind as she prepared to determine whether this woman was worthy of her son. If you're recognizing yourself in Sarah's story and want to learn how to transform these patterns, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of mothers committed to building healthier relationships with their adult children. The first mistake that destroys relationships with adult children is what I call solution jumping, and Sarah demonstrated it perfectly within minutes of Jake's arrival. As they settled into her living room, Jake took Rachel's hand and announced with nervous excitement that they were engaged. Instead of pausing to absorb this momentous news or celebrating their joy, Sarah's mind immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "Oh my goodness, congratulations!" she exclaimed, but before Jake could respond, she was already pulling out her phone. "I've been researching venues just in case this day came, and I found 3 perfect locations within your budget range. This garden pavilion books 18 months in advance, so we need to call first thing Monday morning." Rachel and Jake exchanged glances as Sarah continued her rapid-fire planning session. "I've already created a preliminary budget spreadsheet based on average wedding costs in the area, and I can help you set up vendor meetings next weekend. The florist I used for your cousin's wedding gives family discounts, and I know exactly which photographer captures outdoor ceremonies beautifully." Sarah's voice rose with enthusiasm as she described timeline strategies and guest list management techniques, completely missing the way Jake's excitement deflated with each suggestion. What began as their special moment had transformed into Sarah's project management presentation. Rachel attempted to interject gently, "We haven't really started thinking about details yet," but Sarah barely heard her. "That's exactly why timing is so crucial. The best vendors book up quickly, and if we don't move fast, you'll be stuck with second-tier options. I know this feels overwhelming, but trust me, organization is everything when it comes to weddings. I've seen too many couples struggle because they waited too long to start planning." Sarah pulled out a notebook she'd apparently prepared in advance, filled with contact information and pricing estimates she'd researched over the years. Jake felt his stomach sink as he watched his mother transform their intimate announcement into a logistics operation. This was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, sharing their love and excitement with his family. Instead, he found himself defending their right to take things slowly and figure out their own approach. "Mom, we literally just decided to get engaged. We want to enjoy being engaged before we start planning anything. But Sarah had already moved on to discussing seasonal considerations and venue availability, her anxiety about their unplanned future overriding her ability to simply be present with their happiness. Solution jumping happens when mothers immediately leap into fix-it mode instead of simply being present with their adult children's experiences. It stems from years of parenting where your job was to anticipate problems and provide solutions before your child even recognized the challenges. For 18 years, your value as a mother was measured by your ability to smooth their path, prevent their struggles, and guide them towards success. You developed hypervigilance about potential problems and pride in your ability to provide solutions quickly and efficiently. This approach served your family well when your children were young and genuinely needed your guidance and protection. But adult children need something entirely different from you now. They need witnesses to their joy, validators of their capabilities, and supporters of their decision-making process. When you immediately offer solutions, you communicate that their excitement isn't enough, their planning abilities are insufficient, and their autonomy requires your supervision. Your adult child wants to share their happiness and feel your genuine celebration of their milestone. Instead, they receive project management and strategic planning, which transforms their joyful announcement into another problem requiring your expertise. This pattern particularly damages relationships because it robs your adult children of the satisfaction of working through challenges independently. Jake and Rachel hadn't even begun to envision their wedding celebration, but Sarah's immediate solutions made them feel like their engagement was just another problem requiring her intervention. They wanted to savor the decision, share their happiness, and gradually explore possibilities together. Instead, they found themselves defending their right to figure things out at their own pace, while Sarah's anxiety about their unplanned future dominated the conversation. Your solution, jumping, however well-intentioned, communicates that you don't trust their competence or respect their timeline. It suggests that their approach to life requires your immediate intervention to prevent disaster. This undermines their confidence in their own decision-making abilities and makes them reluctant to share future developments with you, knowing that excitement will be met with overwhelming advice rather than simple celebration. They begin to edit their sharing, keeping joyful news to themselves to protect it from being transformed into your problem-solving projects. The antidote to solution jumping is practicing what I call curious presence. Instead of immediately offering solutions, ask questions that help your adult children explore their own thoughts and feelings about their experiences. How does it feel to be engaged? What are you most excited about? What aspects of planning feel most important to you right now? These questions invite them to share their internal experience while demonstrating your confidence in their ability to navigate their own decisions. Your role transforms from problem solver to interested witness, which creates space for genuine connection. The second devastating mistake emerged during dinner as Sarah began what Jake privately called the interrogation. While serving the elaborate meal she'd prepared, Sarah turned her attention to Rachel with a series of questions that felt more like a job interview than getting to know you conversation. So, Rachel, tell me about your career trajectory. Do you see photography as a long-term profession or more of a creative outlet? What's your 5-year financial plan? How do you handle stress in high-pressure situations? Each question carried an underlying evaluation that made Rachel feel like she was auditioning for the role of daughter-in-law rather than sharing who she was as a person. Rachel tried to answer authentically while sensing the assessment happening beneath Sarah's friendly demeanor. I love photography because it allows me to capture emotional moments and help people see beauty in their everyday lives, she began. But Sarah interrupted with follow-up questions about income stability and business growth strategies. That's wonderful, dear, but have you considered the financial challenges of creative careers? How do you plan to build a sustainable client base? What's your backup plan if the photography market becomes oversaturated? Sarah's questions revealed her underlying concerns about Rachel's ability to contribute financially to Jake's future. Security. Jake watched this dynamic unfold with familiar frustration, recognizing the same evaluative approach Sarah had used with his friends throughout his teenage years. "Mom, Rachel doesn't need to defend her career choices," he said, but Sarah genuinely believed she was showing appropriate interest in Rachel's life. "I'm just trying to understand her better," Sarah protested, not recognizing that her approach was creating distance rather than connection. These are important practical considerations for any young couple. Sarah continued her assessment throughout dinner, asking about Rachel's family background, geographic flexibility, and views on traditional gender roles. "Have you thought about how you'll balance career demands with family responsibilities? What's your philosophy on financial management? How important is geographic stability to you?" These weren't conversations. They were compatibility assessments disguised as motherly interest. Sarah was conducting a thorough evaluation of Rachel's suitability as Jake's life partner, measuring her responses against predetermined criteria for daughter-in-law acceptance. Evaluation-focused. Questioning destroys relationships because it positions you as a judge rather than a curious family member who wants to understand and appreciate your child's partner. Rachel could sense Sarah's underlying agenda in every question, making her feel defensive rather than welcomed. She found herself crafting answers she thought Sarah wanted to hear instead of sharing her authentic self. The conversation became a performance designed to earn approval rather than an opportunity for genuine connection and mutual discovery. This pattern stems from your natural protective instincts and desire to ensure your child's happiness and security. You've spent years guiding your child toward good decisions and away from harmful choices, so it feels natural to evaluate their romantic partner's suitability. You genuinely believe that asking strategic questions demonstrates responsible parenting and appropriate concern for your child's future welfare. Your questions feel practical and necessary from your perspective, covering important life areas that will impact their relationship success. But evaluation-focused questioning communicates that your approval is required for their relationship to be valid. Your adult child feels forced to choose between defending their partner and maintaining peace with you, creating resentment and tension that damages your relationship with both of them. Meanwhile, their partner learns that earning your acceptance requires performing rather than simply being themselves, setting up a dynamic of permanent tension where authenticity conflicts with family harmony. Your adult children need you to approach their partners with genuine curiosity about who they are, not strategic questioning about whether they meet your standards. When you ask evaluation-focused questions, you rob yourself of the opportunity to discover what your child loves about this person and what makes their relationship special. You miss the chance to appreciate qualities that might not align with your priorities, but bring joy and fulfillment to your child's life. The alternative approach involves person-focused curiosity that seeks to understand rather than evaluate. Instead of asking about career stability, ask about what drew them to photography and what they love most about their work. Rather than questioning their financial planning, inquire about their dreams and passions. Replace assessment questions with discovery questions that invite them to share their personality, values, and perspective on life. This approach builds connection and helps you understand what your child sees in their partner. The third mistake revealed itself Saturday morning when Sarah casually mentioned details about Jake's recent work projects that he'd never shared with her directly. "I saw on your company's page that you won that design award," she said over breakfast, trying to sound proud and informed. "And I noticed you've been working late nights based on your activity timestamps." Are you taking care of yourself? Jake's expression shifted from surprise to discomfort as he realized Sarah had been monitoring his digital presence, gathering information about his life through social media surveillance rather than direct communication. Sarah had developed an elaborate system for staying informed about Jake's life through digital monitoring. She followed his professional profiles, checked his social media accounts daily, and even monitored his online activity patterns to track his schedule and stress levels. She knew about his work projects, social activities, and even his sleep patterns based on when he posted or appeared online. When she referenced information she'd gathered this way, she thought she was demonstrating care and attention to his life. Instead, she was violating his privacy and making him feel surveilled rather than supported. This pattern represents emotional eavesdropping, the third relationship-destroying mistake that many mothers don't even recognize as problematic. Sarah justified her behavior as staying connected and showing interest in Jake's life. She told herself that public social media posts were fair game for parental observation and that monitoring his professional achievements showed supportive investment in his career. When she casually mentioned things she'd discovered online, she believed she was proving her attention and care for his daily experiences. Jake felt betrayed by Sarah's digital monitoring, knowing that she was forming opinions about his life based on incomplete online information rather than honest conversations. The practice made him edit his social media presence, knowing Sarah was watching and would comment on or question anything that seemed concerning to her. He began to feel like he couldn't share anything spontaneously because Sarah already knew everything through her covert information gathering, which eliminated the natural flow of sharing and discovery that makes relationships feel organic. And mutual emotional eavesdropping creates a fundamental breach of trust because it positions you as a detective in your adult child's life rather than a person they choose to confide in. When you gather information about their life through surveillance rather than invitation, you communicate that you don't respect their autonomy or trust them to share appropriately with you. Your adult child feels violated by the realization that you're monitoring their digital presence, making them self-conscious about their online behavior and resentful of your intrusion into their private life. This mistake is particularly damaging because it prevents natural conversation flow and mutual sharing. When you already know details about your child's life through digital surveillance, you rob both of you of genuine discovery moments. Jake stopped sharing work successes because Sarah had already seen them online and commented. He avoided mentioning challenges because he knew Sarah would reference social media evidence of his stress levels or late-night activity. The relationship lost its organic quality, replaced by Sarah's anxious need to stay informed through surveillance rather than invitation. Your emotional eavesdropping also creates false intimacy based on one-way information gathering rather than mutual sharing. And trust. You feel connected to your child's life because you know details about their daily experiences, but this connection is artificial because it's not based on their choice to include you. Your child feels disconnected because they know you're learning about their life through monitoring rather than genuine interest in spending time together and hearing their perspectives directly. The fourth devastating mistake became apparent when Sarah immediately began sharing Jake and Rachel's engagement news as if it were her own achievement. Within hours of their announcement, she'd called her sister, posted on social media, and texted several neighbors about her exciting news. When discussing the engagement with relatives, Sarah's language revealed her ownership mentality. "I'm so proud. This makes me so happy. I've been hoping for this, and my son is getting married." Every conversation centered on Sarah's feelings about their decision, rather than celebrating Jake and Rachel's happiness. Sarah's sister listened as she described the engagement announcement, but noticed how the conversation focused entirely on Sarah's emotional experience. "I just feel so fulfilled knowing that my parenting led to this moment," Sarah explained. "All those years of teaching him about love and commitment have paid off. I'm so excited to finally plan a wedding and become a mother-in-law. This is what I've been waiting for." Sarah discussed their engagement as the natural result of her successful mothering, taking credit for Jake's capacity to love and commit to a relationship. This pattern represents emotional ownership, where mothers experience their adult children's milestones as personal achievements rather than independent life events. Sarah had unconsciously claimed Jake's engagement as her success story, discussing how fulfilled she felt and how her mothering had led to this moment. She planned to frame their engagement photo next to pictures of her own wedding, creating a narrative where their love story became part of her legacy rather than their independent beginning. This appropriation of their experience left Jake feeling like his relationship existed primarily to provide Sarah with emotional satisfaction. Sarah's immediate sharing of their news revealed another layer of emotional ownership. She posted about their engagement on social media before Jake and Rachel had announced it themselves, robbing them of the opportunity to share their own news in their own way. Her posts focused on her excitement and pride rather than their happiness, making their milestone about her emotional fulfillment rather than their achievement. She tagged family members and friends in posts about her son's engagement, treating their private moment as her public celebration. Emotional ownership destroys relationships because it reduces your adult child's autonomous experiences to extensions of your identity. Jake felt suffocated by Sarah's immediate claim on his engagement, watching her process their news through the lens of her own emotions rather than focusing on their joy. Rachel observed this dynamic with growing concern, recognizing that Sarah viewed their relationship as something that happened to her rather than something Jake and Rachel created together. The engagement that should have been their special beginning became Sarah's emotional possession. When you experience your adult child's achievements as your own, you communicate that their independent life exists primarily to fulfill your needs, rather than their own development. This creates resentment because your child feels like they can't have experiences that belong purely to them. Every success becomes filtered through your emotional requirements. Every milestone becomes measured by your satisfaction levels. Your adult child begins to edit their sharing, knowing that you'll appropriate their experiences and make them about your feelings rather than their growth. The healthy alternative involves celebrating your child's achievements as their independent accomplishments while maintaining appropriate emotional boundaries. You can feel proud of the person they've become without claiming credit for their specific successes. You can express happiness for their joy without making their experiences about your emotional fulfillment. This approach allows you to share in their happiness while respecting their autonomy and ownership of their own life experiences. Subscribe to our channel if you want to learn how Sarah discovered the remaining 4 mistakes and transformed all 8 patterns to rebuild her relationship with Jake and Rachel stronger than ever before. The 5th relationship-destroying mistake revealed itself throughout Saturday as Sarah unconsciously treated Jake like he was still 15 years old. During breakfast, she reminded him to take his vitamins, commenting that he looked pale and probably wasn't eating enough vegetables. When he mentioned feeling tired, she suggested he needed more sleep and offered to make him a doctor's appointment. As they walked through her neighborhood, she pointed out that his hair was getting long and recommended her stylist. "You know how important first impressions are in your field," she said, reaching up to smooth an imaginary cowlick. Each interaction carried the underlying assumption that Jake needed her guidance for basic life management. This behavior represents boundary blurring, where mothers continue parenting behaviors long after their children have become capable adults. Sarah couldn't distinguish between caring about Jake and caring for him, offering unsolicited advice about everything from his posture to his career decisions. She commented on his clothing choices, suggested he call his dentist for a checkup, and even offered to pack him leftovers because she worried about his nutrition. These gestures felt maternal and loving to Sarah, but they communicated to Jake that she didn't trust his ability to manage his own life effectively. Throughout the morning, Sarah's parental oversight continued in subtle but persistent ways. She adjusted the thermostat without asking if Jake was comfortable, brought him a sweater because she thought he looked cold, and reminded him to use sunscreen when they stepped outside. When Jake mentioned a minor work stress, Sarah immediately launched into advice about time management and conflict resolution, treating his casual comment as a cry for help rather than simple sharing. She even suggested he might benefit from the stress management techniques she'd read about in her wellness magazines. Sarah's inability to recognize Jake as a fully autonomous adult extended to her interactions with Rachel as well. She offered Rachel a jacket, suggested she might want different shoes for their neighborhood walk, and even tried to apply sunscreen to her face without asking. "You have such fair skin, dear," Sarah said, approaching with the bottle. "You'll burn in no time in this sun." Rachel politely declined, but Sarah persisted with warnings about UV damage and skin cancer risks, treating a 27-year-old woman like a child who couldn't assess her own sun exposure needs. The pattern became most obvious when Sarah began offering Jake and Rachel unsolicited advice about their relationship. She suggested communication strategies she'd learned from talk shows, recommended books about successful marriages, and even shared tips about maintaining romance during stressful periods. "You know, couples who exercise together stay together," she said, completely missing Jake's eye roll. "I read about this great hiking group for young professionals. You should look into it." Her advice covered everything from financial planning to household management, as if their engagement had revealed dangerous gaps in their life skills that required immediate maternal intervention. Boundary blurring destroys adult relationships because it prevents your child from experiencing themselves as competent, independent individuals in your presence. Jake felt infantilized by Sarah's constant suggestions and reminders, finding himself either defending his choices or reverting to teenage rebelliousness just to assert his autonomy. Rachel watched these interactions with growing discomfort, wondering if Sarah would extend the same parental oversight to her once they married. The dynamic made Jake feel like he regressed to adolescence whenever he visited home, losing the confident adult identity he'd worked years to establish. This pattern stems from the natural difficulty of transitioning from hands-on parenting to peer-level relationship with your adult children. For 18 years, your job was to guide, protect, and teach your child how to navigate the world safely and successfully. You developed keen awareness of their needs, vulnerabilities, and areas requiring development. Your parental instincts became finely tuned to anticipate their needs and provide guidance before they even asked for help. This approach was not only appropriate but essential when they were genuinely dependent on your wisdom and protection. But continuing these behaviors with adult children communicates that you don't recognize their growth into capable, independent individuals. When you offer unsolicited advice about basic life management, you suggest that they're still operating at a level that requires parental supervision. Your adult children need you to relate to them as peers who happen to be younger, not as dependents who happen to be older. They want to feel proud of their independence when they're around you, not defensive about choices they wouldn't question in any other relationship. The constant micromanaging erodes their confidence and makes them reluctant to share details about their lives, knowing you'll respond with advice rather than respect. Jake began editing his conversations with Sarah, avoiding mentions of minor challenges or decisions because he knew she'd offer solutions he didn't want or need. This created distance in their relationship as Jake protected his autonomy by limiting Sarah's access to information about his daily life. Rachel observed this pattern and made mental notes about what she could and couldn't share with Sarah in the future. Your adult children also need space to make their own mistakes and learn from their own experiences without your intervention. When you continue offering parental guidance, you rob them of the satisfaction of solving their own problems and building confidence in their decision-making abilities. They need to know that you trust their judgment and respect their capacity to manage their own lives, even when their approaches differ from what you would choose. The sixth devastating mistake emerged during lunch when Sarah began referencing her past sacrifices as evidence of how much she deserved to be involved in Jake's current decisions. After everything I've done to get you to this point, I think I've earned the right to have an opinion about your wedding plans, she said, her voice carrying a wounded tone that made Jake's stomach tighten. She mentioned the years of driving him to activities, the college tuition she'd stretched to afford, and the countless nights she'd stayed awake, worrying about his future. Each reference carried an implicit debt that Jake was expected to repay through increased involvement and deference to her preferences. Sarah's sacrifice scorekeeping had been building for years, though she'd never articulated it so directly before. She remembered every financial strain she'd endured for Jake's benefit, every social event she'd missed to support his activities, and every personal sacrifice she'd made to prioritize his needs. In her mind, these investments had created a permanent account that Jake owed her, payable through gratitude, involvement, and consideration of her feelings in his major life decisions. She genuinely believed that her past giving had earned her ongoing influence in his adult choices. The pattern revealed itself in subtle ways throughout their conversations. When Jake mentioned wanting to handle wedding expenses independently, Sarah reminded him of the money she'd spent on his education. When he expressed desire for privacy in their planning process, she referenced the years she'd devoted to his development. "I gave up my career advancement to be available for your school events," she said pointedly. "I think I deserve to be part of this important milestone in your life." Each reference to her sacrifices carried an undertone of emotional manipulation, disguised as reasonable expectation. Sarah's sacrifice narrative extended beyond financial investments to include emotional and social costs she'd paid for Jake's benefit. She mentioned friendships she'd neglected while focusing on his needs, hobbies she'd abandoned to support his interests, and personal dreams she'd deferred to prioritize his opportunities. "I put my whole life on hold to make sure you had every advantage," she told him, during a moment of particular tension. "Now that you're successful and happy, I feel like you're shutting me out of the very life I helped you build." This pattern represents sacrifice scorekeeping, where mothers use their past investments as leverage for current influence. Sarah had created an emotional ledger of everything she'd given Jake, from financial support to emotional availability, and she unconsciously expected returns on these investments in the form of continued dependency and gratitude. When Jake made decisions without consulting her or chose directions she wouldn't have selected, Sarah felt cheated of the influence she believed her sacrifices had earned. The love she'd freely given during his childhood had transformed into a debt she expected him to honor through adulthood. Sacrifice scorekeeping destroys relationships because it retroactively turns unconditional love into conditional transactions. Jake felt burdened by guilt whenever Sarah referenced her past giving, knowing that her sacrifices had been real, but also recognizing that he'd never asked for them or agreed to lifelong repayment terms. The dynamic made him feel like he could never fully separate from Sarah because her past investments required ongoing returns. Rachel observed this pattern with alarm, realizing that Sarah viewed parenting as creating permanent indebtedness rather than launching independent adults. When you reference past sacrifices as justification for current influence, you communicate that your love came with strings attached, and that your child's independence threatens your return on investment. This creates resentment because your adult child feels manipulated by guilt rather than motivated by genuine appreciation. They begin to avoid sharing decisions with you, knowing that disagreement will result in reminders of everything you've done for them. The relationship becomes transactional rather than relational, based on debt rather than mutual affection. The healthy approach involves viewing your past investments as gifts freely given to launch your child into independent adulthood. Your sacrifices were expressions of love designed to help them become self-sufficient, not loans requiring lifelong repayment. When you release these investments without expecting returns, you free both yourself and your child to build a relationship based on choice rather than obligation. Your child can then appreciate your past giving without feeling enslaved by it. The seventh mistake became glaringly obvious when Sarah revealed the extent of her secret wedding planning for a son who had just gotten engaged the night before. She pulled out a carefully organized binder filled with venue photos, vendor contact lists, and detailed timelines she'd been collecting just in case this day arrived. Her Pinterest boards contained hundreds of pins categorized by ceremony themes, reception styles, and honeymoon destinations. She'd already researched photographers in their area, compared catering options, and even identified potential date conflicts with family schedules. Sarah presented this preparation as helpful foresight, but Jake and Rachel felt overwhelmed by the realization that she'd been planning their wedding for years without their knowledge or input. Sarah had spent countless hours over the years imagining Jake's future wedding, creating detailed visions of how the celebration should unfold based on her dreams rather than his preferences. She'd bookmarked venues, researched vendors, and developed strong opinions about everything from flower arrangements to music selections. Her computer contained folders of wedding inspiration photos organized by season, theme, and budget level. She'd even created preliminary guest lists and calculated costs for different celebration sizes, all while Jake was single and showing no immediate signs of settling down. The depth of Sarah's wedding planning went far beyond casual daydreaming. She'd attended bridal shows, collected vendor business cards, and maintained relationships with wedding professionals she'd met through friends' celebrations. She subscribed to wedding magazines and blogs, constantly gathering ideas for the celebration. She was convinced Jake would eventually want. She'd even visited potential venues during their open house events, taking notes and photos to add to her growing collection of wedding resources. When Jake expressed surprise at the extent of her preparation, Sarah defended her planning as practical foresight. "I wanted to be ready to help when the time came," she explained, not recognizing how her years of investment in his imaginary wedding had created expectations and pressure around their actual celebration. "Good venues book up so far in advance, and I knew you'd want the best options available. I was just trying to be helpful." She couldn't understand why Jake and Rachel seemed overwhelmed rather than grateful for her extensive research and preparation. This behavior represents future hijacking, where mothers become more invested in their adult children's upcoming life events than the children themselves. Sarah had essentially planned Jake's wedding in her imagination for years, creating detailed visions that had nothing to do with his actual preferences or relationship. When Jake and Rachel expressed interest in a small, intimate ceremony, Sarah's disappointment was palpable because their vision conflicted with the elaborate celebration she'd been mentally planning and practically preparing for years. Future hijacking destroys relationships because it robs your adult children of the joy of creating their own visions and making their own discoveries. Jake felt suffocated by Sarah's extensive planning, realizing that she'd been living in his future rather than allowing him to create it independently. Rachel was disturbed by the intensity of Sarah's investment in an event that belonged to them, wondering how they could possibly plan a wedding that felt authentic when Sarah had already designed every detail. The couple felt like supporting actors in Sarah's wedding fantasy rather than the leads in their own love story. When you become more invested in your adult child's future events than they are, you communicate that their experiences exist primarily to fulfill your visions rather than their own desires. This creates pressure for them to perform your dreams rather than explore their own possibilities. They lose the excitement of discovery because you've already researched every option and formed opinions about their choices. Your adult child begins to feel like their life is a script you've written, rather than a story they're creating, leading them to exclude you from planning processes to protect their autonomy. The eighth and most devastating mistake revealed itself when Sarah's enthusiasm for Jake and Rachel's engagement noticeably cooled after learning they wanted a small ceremony rather than the large celebration she'd envisioned. Her congratulations became strained. Her questions shifted to gentle arguments about why bigger would be better, and her body language communicated disappointment even when her words remained supportive. Sarah couldn't hide her letdown that their vision didn't match her dreams, making Jake and Rachel feel like their happiness wasn't enough if it didn't align with her preferences. Sarah's conditional enthusiasm became obvious in her responses to their wedding preferences. When they mentioned wanting an outdoor ceremony with just immediate family, her face fell visibly before she caught herself and attempted to smile. "But don't you want to celebrate with all the people who love you?" she asked, her tone suggesting that their preference was somehow inadequate or selfish. "This is such a special milestone. Are you sure you don't want something more significant?" Her questions carried subtle pressure to reconsider their choices in favor of her vision. The pattern extended to other aspects of their relationship plans as well. When Rachel mentioned they were considering postponing a honeymoon to save money for a house down payment, Sarah's disappointment was palpable. "But the honeymoon is such an important tradition," she protested. "You'll regret not having that romantic getaway to start your marriage properly." Her responses to their practical decisions consistently communicated that their choices were somehow insufficient or misguided when they didn't align with her expectations. Sarah's conditional celebration became most obvious when she began trying to change their minds rather than supporting their actual preferences. She presented alternative scenarios designed to convince them that her vision would be better for their happiness. "What if we compromised with a medium-sized celebration? Just 50 people instead of 20. That way you could include your college friends and extended family." Her suggestions weren't attempts to support their choices, but efforts to modify their decisions to match her preferences. This final pattern represents conditional celebration, where your support for your adult child's choices depends on whether those choices match your expectations. Sarah loved the idea of Jake getting married, but she struggled to genuinely celebrate a wedding that didn't reflect her values and vision. Her conditional enthusiasm communicated that Jake's happiness was only truly valid when it took forms she approved of. Rachel felt the shift in Sarah's energy immediately, realizing that she'd been measuring their choices against her own criteria rather than simply celebrating their joy. Conditional celebration destroys relationships because it teaches your adult children that your love and support come with terms and conditions. Jake felt like he had to choose between authentic self-expression and his mother's approval, knowing that decisions Sarah disagreed with would result in withdrawn enthusiasm and subtle disappointment. The dynamic made him edit his sharing, knowing that news Sarah disapproved of would be met with attempts to change his mind rather than genuine support. Rachel felt unwelcome in a family where acceptance required conforming to predetermined expectations rather than being valued for who she was. The confrontation that changed everything occurred Saturday evening when Rachel, with gentle but firm conviction, told Sarah she felt judged rather than welcomed into their family. "I appreciate your excitement about our engagement," Rachel said carefully, but I feel like I'm being evaluated instead of getting to know you as a person. I want to build a relationship with you, but I need to feel accepted for who I am rather than assessed for who you think I should be." Her words hung in the air as Sarah realized that her loving intentions had been experienced as controlling criticism. Jake supported Rachel's honesty while adding his own perspective about feeling suffocated by Sarah's intensity. "Mom, I know you love me and want to be involved, but your involvement feels like management rather than support. I need you to trust that I can make good decisions and build a good life without your constant input and oversight." The conversation was painful but necessary, forcing Sarah to confront the gap between her intentions and her impact on the people she loved most. If you want to learn exactly how Sarah transformed these 8 devastating patterns into relationship building behaviors that brought her closer to Jake and Rachel than ever before, please hit that like button to let me know this content is helping you recognize important patterns in your own relationships. The transformation began Sunday morning when Sarah, devastated by the previous evening's honest confrontation, called Dr. Lisa in desperation. Through tears, she explained how her overwhelming love had been experienced as suffocating control by Jake and Rachel. Dr. Lisa helped Sarah recognize each of the 8 patterns she'd unconsciously developed, showing her how to replace relationship-destroying behaviors with connection-building alternatives. "Sarah, your love is genuine, but love without respect becomes control," Dr. Lisa explained gently. "Jake needs to feel chosen, not managed." Dr. Lisa guided Sarah through immediate corrections she could implement that very day. Instead of solution jumping when Jake shared concerns, Sarah learned to practice curious presence by asking about his feelings and trusting his problem-solving abilities. Rather than evaluating Rachel through strategic questioning, she began showing genuine interest in Rachel's photography passion, discovering their shared appreciation for capturing life's meaningful moments. Most importantly, Sarah committed to respecting their digital boundaries by stopping her social media surveillance and waiting for Jake to share directly with her. Sarah also learned to reframe their engagement as Jake and Rachel's achievement, rather than her emotional victory, releasing her sense of ownership over their milestone. She began speaking to Jake as an equal adult rather than a dependent child, acknowledging that her past financial and emotional investments had been gifts, freely given, not loans requiring lifelong repayment. When wedding discussions arose, Sarah asked how she could support their actual preferences rather than pushing her own elaborate vision that had been years in the making. The most challenging correction involved learning unconditional celebration, genuinely supporting Jake and Rachel's choices regardless of whether they matched Sarah's expectations. Dr. Lisa helped Sarah understand that authentic love celebrates what brings your child joy, not what brings you satisfaction. Your job now is to witness their happiness, not direct it, Dr. Lisa emphasized. When you can genuinely celebrate their small ceremony because it makes them happy, you'll discover the difference between loving someone and loving your idea of who they should be. Sarah implemented these changes immediately when Jake and Rachel returned from their morning walk. Instead of overwhelming them with wedding suggestions, she asked simple questions about their vision and listened without offering solutions. When Rachel mentioned her photography business challenges, Sarah showed genuine curiosity about her creative process rather than assessing her financial stability. Most remarkably, when they confirmed their preference for a small ceremony, Sarah took a deep breath and said, "That sounds perfect for you two. How can I support the celebration you actually want?" The weekend's resolution came Sunday evening when something extraordinary happened. Jake voluntarily sought Sarah's emotional support about pre-wedding anxiety, not because she had inserted herself into his concerns, but because her transformed approach made him feel safe to be vulnerable. For the first time in years, he came to her with a problem, trusting that she would listen without judgment and validate his feelings rather than immediately offering solutions or taking over his concerns. As Jake shared his worries about balancing career demands with marriage, Sarah practiced everything Dr. Lisa had taught her. She asked questions that helped Jake explore his own thoughts, reflected back what she heard him saying, and offered emotional support without trying to solve his problems. "It sounds like you're feeling pressure to have everything figured out perfectly," she said gently. "That's such a normal feeling for someone who cares as much as you do about building a strong marriage." Rachel watched this interaction with amazement, seeing a completely different version of the woman who had interrogated her just 2 days earlier. When Sarah asked Rachel about her own pre-wedding feelings, Rachel felt genuinely heard and accepted rather than evaluated. "Thank you for making me feel so welcomed," Rachel told Sarah as they prepared to leave. "I can see how much you love Jake, and I'm grateful to be joining a family where that love feels supportive rather than overwhelming." Jake expressed sincere appreciation for feeling heard rather than managed, noting how different their interactions felt when Sarah related to him as a capable adult rather than a child requiring supervision. Sarah discovered the profound difference between being needed out of obligation and being chosen out of genuine trust and affection. The relationship she'd been desperately trying to preserve through control had flourished the moment she let go and created space for authentic connection. Now think honestly about your own relationships with your adult children. Which of these 8 patterns do you recognize in your daily interactions? Are you solution jumping when they share experiences or practicing curious presence? Do you ask evaluation-focused questions that assess their choices or show genuine interest in understanding who they are as people? Are you monitoring their digital lives instead of waiting for them to share directly? Do you experience their achievements as your emotional victories rather than celebrating their independent success? Consider whether you're treating your adult children as capable peers or continuing to parent them through unsolicited advice and protective oversight. Examine whether you reference past sacrifices to justify current influence, or whether you've released those investments as gifts given freely. Reflect on whether you're more invested in their future plans than they are, and whether your celebration of their choices depends on your approval rather than their happiness. The beautiful truth is that transforming these patterns creates deeper connection than control ever could. When you relate to your adult children with respect rather than management, curiosity rather than judgment, and celebration rather than conditional approval, you discover the joy of being chosen rather than obligated. How will you begin changing these patterns today to build the relationship both you and your adult child truly deserve? If this content has opened your eyes to transforming your most important relationships, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom on building authentic connections with the people you love most.